Well, good evening, everyone. We're thrilled of the crowd and the turnout tonight. My name is Gordon Stables. I'm the director of the School of Journalism at USC. And I wanted to thank everybody and remind you that you can watch it from the stream and the large media wall upstairs. So not only from a fire code perspective, but if you get tired over the course of the program tonight, please know that we've got it streaming and available upstairs to watch. But thank you. Seriously, what a fantastic crowd. On behalf of Dean Willow Bay, the faculty, staff, students, and school of USC Annenberg, thank you all for being here. Part of the role of a research university is to have moments like tonight, is to have remarkable opportunities where we combine the idea that scholarship, practice, students, professionals, practitioners, researchers, those may be different moments, different points on a continuum, but they all have to be part of a broader conversation. The role of a research university is to complicate these ideas and say, how do you look at those different perspectives? So please, I encourage everyone tonight, don't feel that your point on that scale or the continuum is too small or isn't relevant. The value of this kind of a conversation is that it can't take place in another setting. It can't take place in another moment. And at the Annenberg School, we're incredibly proud of what's taking place within our public relations, faculty, students, scholarship, and programming. This is an exciting moment. We've had an exciting series of programming. But I think the timing and the subject tonight couldn't be more appropriate and couldn't be more timely. My background as a communication professor means that I think a lot about some of these subjects. And one of the things that strikes me is I know we're probably all familiar with Orwell from a variety of things. Maybe for some of you it was the required reading in high school that you were looking for the film instead, or from other approaches. But I think back about Orwell's essays where he talks about the moments in time where the gap between language and meaning becomes more and more pronounced. And I think at that time he was writing because he saw the moments of alienation when technology creates the possibility for interactions far beyond our comfort zone, far beyond the ways that we feel truly connected and truly engaged. And so the notion of where alienation comes from is at the core of what we're talking about tonight. We have powerful tools to communicate, but do we have communities that reinforce those approaches? So I'm going to otherwise step back and thank you all for being here and thank the school and thank everyone for being part of being here tonight. I know a number of our faculty have brought their classes, and so it's great for students to be part of this experience, and it's really exciting. And then otherwise introduce someone that you all know in different roles and different capacities. You may know him as the CEO of Goen. You may know him as Professor Cook. You may know him as the director of the Center for Public Relations. But everyone, I think, can appreciate the important role that Fred plays in convening, developing, and helping all these conversations take place. So please join me in welcoming Fred Cook.
Appreciate it. Hi, everybody. Oh, look, this is a great crowd. I thank you all for being here. We really appreciate your support and your involvement in what the work we're doing here. It means a lot to all of us, especially the students at USC. We have a really interesting program planned for you tonight, and I'm going to kick it off right away by introducing our keynote speaker. First, I want to tell you a little bit about the company that he works for, and I hope I have some of these facts correct.
We can Google them, Fred.
We can Google them. Well, it was started by a couple of college students at some university up north. I forget the name of it. And it was originally, they named it Back Rub, right?
No comment.
And just about 20 years ago, 1998, they filed for incorporation, and they were headquartered in a garage near Stanford. Today, the parent company Alphabet has a market cap of about $830 billion. So for all you students out there, they're setting a pretty high bar of what you're going to do in the next 20 years. They have 98,000 employees and 90% market share of global search. So 9 out of 10 searches are happening on Google. Since 2010, they've averaged 1 acquisition a week. And in 2018, they spent $16 billion on research and development. And so far, they've filed 536 patents about artificial intelligence alone. It's an amazing company. And they have an amazing chief communications officer with Cory DuBrowa. And I think I'm supposed to advance the slide. There you Oh, that's Gordon. There, it's me. We're a little behind on the slides, as you can see. Now a little background on Cory, the guy that runs the communications operation at Google. He's the VP of Global Communications and Public Affairs, and he leads a team of about 300 people worldwide, which is enormous. Prior to Google, he's worked with some of the highest profile companies and CEOs in the world, starting with Nike, Starbucks, where his CEO is currently running for president, and most recently at Salesforce. He is also a founding member of the USC Board of Advisors for the Center for Public Relations, and he's one of the nicest guys in the public relations business, and I'm honored that he's here tonight, and I'm honored that he's my friend. And I just want to introduce Cory DuBrowa. Thanks, Cory. Thank you.
Thank you. Wow, what do you say to that? Well, good evening to everybody, and thank you for being here. And Fred, Dean Bay, students, faculty, alumni, friends of the university, thanks for asking me to be here tonight. As Fred said, I'm a member of the Annenberg Center for Public Relations Board of Advisors. And interestingly, there's a person in the audience. I would love for him to raise his hand. Kirk Stewart. Kirk, where are you?
Right here.
Hey, Kirk. Right there, right in front. Fantastic Trojan communicator, kind of a legend, and somebody who had a very instrumental role in actually helping to put together this symposium. He is also my former boss during the period of time that I was at Nike. I wish that you all would give a hand to this fine Trojan, Kirk Stewart. So I'm honored to be here, and as Fred said, I lead the communications team at Google. I have the honor of doing that. I was just in Mexico City this morning, actually, for the last couple of days with my Latin American team. We have regional offsites throughout the year, and so I got the chance to spend a couple of days with that team, which was terrific. And I hadn't visited Mexico City on business, actually, since Kirk and I worked together, so a good long while, and it's amazing to see the rate and pace of change that's happening literally around the world, but certainly in that region. I had breakfast yesterday with the editorial director of Reforma. We had a very long conversation about some of the similarities between what's happening in Mexico from a political point of view, what's happening in the U.S. It was fascinating. So, I think as the Chinese proverb says, we're blessed to live in interesting times. Things are really interesting right now. So no matter where in the world your team may be working, the need for people who can communicate a company's values, its purpose, and its story is only growing. And really, especially in the technology industry, I think that's particularly true. And nobody understands this better than another former boss of mine who is here in the front row as well, and you'll hear from her later this evening, Melissa Wagner Zorkin. Melissa is the founder of WeComms, and I had the good fortune to spend a decade by her side really learning about how to tell stories of technology. So WeComms has been at the forefront of telling stories about technology that matters since its founding decades ago. And I feel like I really had the benefit of learning in that environment and can apply many of those lessons to the role that I have now. So at Google, my team and I are really on a similar mission. We're responsible for explaining to the world why technology matters. And in a variety of different ways, we want to, parlay this front row seat that we have to all of these technological breakthroughs that are happening and changing everything from the way that we access information and communicate with each other to how doctors diagnose disease and how researchers explore the solar system. All of those things. And that's the privilege that we have, is to communicate about that and many more. So with these technologies come increasingly complex challenges, from regulation and ethics debates, conversations about access and inclusion. These are all really important discussions, and we have to do as a communication team our due diligence every day to immerse ourselves in the nuances of these discussions and make sure that we understand all sides of every argument, both the opportunities and the challenges that we have. So despite the ebbs and the flows of sort of the average news cycle in any given day, and believe me, there are plenty of ebbs and flows, I nevertheless remain a technology optimist. So when Fred shared this year's Annenberg Relevance Report with me, there was one particular subject that really caught my attention and that we'll talk about, I suspect, later this evening, When asked about the importance of human capital versus technology in communications, in PR, the responses to that question formed something of a divide. And the divide looks like this. Students generally said that technology would be of more importance in the future, technology, whereas PR pros, people who'd been in the industry for a while, answered the question that they thought that people would actually be the most important part of that equation. So if my last year at Google and really my last 2 decades in communication are any kind of instruction set, what I would say is that there's always been a polarity between the importance of people and technology, always. And this polarity is what builds sort of the dystopian tension that we see in a lot of the entertainment that we look at now. So whether it's Westworld or Her, you can literally rattle off about a dozen different shows, you get a sense that there's always been questions about whether tech or people will outweigh one another in importance in our industry. But the fact is that really people and technology are both important. Without people, the technology part just isn't all that interesting. That's something that Melissa taught me. It's even something that Kirk at a company like Nike, which wasn't really a technology company, also taught me. Really telling people stories about how helpful or useful that technology might be. So at Google, we balance on the fulcrum between people and technology every day. That's the idea. That's where we live. That's our sweet spot. And so what I want to talk about tonight with all of you are the ways that this plays out when we opine about the present and the future of communications, our industry, our profession. So I'm going to spend some time talking about the importance of trust and some tips on maybe thoughts how to build trust and how data and measurement is becoming more critical in terms of moving the role of communicator from artist to scientist. I have a couple of visual backdrops. I'm going to try not to get too distracted by the images, but the first one is really this corner box up here. With great power comes great responsibility. That was Uncle Ben's advice for Peter Parker, Spider-Man, for those of you who are into the comics or you've seen the movie. Technology faces increasing scrutiny and skepticism. Trust in companies and media continues to shift. So how many of you in the room are familiar with Richard Edelman's Trust Barometer, the firm and the byproduct of that? So really, this is the biggest longitudinal study of a single attribute that our industry has. It's been going for 19 years. And so it's more important than ever to demonstrate that trust isn't just about, as communicators, what we say, but more importantly, it's about how we bring these words to life through our actions, what our companies do, the way that we demonstrate our values in how we act and how we sort of move about the world. So as communicators and relationship builders, much of the work around rebuilding and maintaining trust falls on our shoulders as communicators, either directly or indirectly. So I've talked before about how the word CCO, in addition to Chief Communications Officer, could also stand for Chief Conscience Officer, having a conscience, thinking about that and bringing that lens to the discussion every day. So it's certainly not down to any single person in any organization to serve as the ethical backstop for that company, but it is the responsibility of the CCO to bring that energy or that lens to bear and to kind of rally resources around that discussion. So as we think about trust, that's certainly how I think about the role that I get to play. And this year's Edelman Trust Barometer showed that one of the most trusted relationships in all of the variability and trust that exists out there is the one that's between employee and employer. Of all of the trust factors that exist in the world, that is the most trusted relationship that they measure. So this truth, even in an era when basic institutions such as media, government, NGOs, and business, the trust in those has eroded, it's molded the way that we're thinking at Google about our communications team and the way that we engage with folks across the company and the way that we extend that out into external audiences as well. So our communications team is comprised of people who communicate externally, which takes a number of different forms: thought leaders, policymakers, direct-to-consumer, but it also is a big population of people who communicate internally. Their job is to really think about the messages that will land best with Googlers. And when you take into account the level of transparency that employees have come to expect in this trust relationship with their employer, the fact that every employee holds the means to publishing right here in their hand. Every single employee has a phone. So they become, in a way, the first publishers of many of the things that we talk about inside the company. So it's clear in many respects that internal has become the new external. It's equally as important. And communication standards inside a company have to adhere to the same exacting standards that we apply outside the walls of our company as well. Or even more so when you consider the trust equity that's at stake there. So I learned a valuable lesson. One of the things that Fred didn't mention in his introduction is I had a side hustle for 20 years as a rock critic. It's kind of weird, I know. I'll let you take it in for a sec. But in doing that, I had the opportunity to spend a lot of time with artists and with musicians. And one of the most valuable lessons that I ever received as a communicator came from this person. His name is Thurston Moore. Thurston is a guitar player for a band called Sonic Youth. And during one interview, I don't know that he thought it was particularly profound, but I thought it was particularly profound. He said, once the thought has left your head, it's already compromised. So I'll say it again. Once the thought has left your head, it's already compromised. And I've thought about that a lot over the years. And the way that I sort of take it in today as the head of communications at Google is that when we communicate with our employees, that thought has effectively already sort of left our hands in our control system. Now it's down to our internal advocates and ambassadors, the people who sort of represent the brand to the world, to carry that forward. So I think a lot about that when I think about how we engage Googlers and the responsibility that we have, not just to communicate messages outside our world, but also within the company as well. So, given these dynamics, given these shifts in trust, how are we building and maintaining trust? What are the actions that we're taking? So, the one irrefutable and consistent thing about Google when we talk to audiences all over the world about what do you think about Google? When we're at our best, when technology is at its best, the people who are surveyed describe Google products as helpful. Helpful. What you do for me is you help me. And no matter what products they use or where they live, they perceive Google and technology to be at its best when it's described that way. So what does helpful look like in the wild? What does that actually mean? Well, helpful could be as simple as the time that you save every day through the search queries that you type into a Google box. So Google's average query response time is roughly 1/4 of a second. So when you blink, that's 1/10 of a second. So when we think about helpful, when we think about the algorithm that sort of sits beneath our search and the way that we sort of serve up query results back to you, what we're thinking about is the time that you save. Whether in the old days, you might have looked it up in the dictionary, you might phone a friend, whatever. Google is meant to save you time. That's meant to be helpful. But what else does helpful represent? Well, helpful could look like this. So helpful could also be our investment in artificial intelligence to help doctors in India to prevent and cure a stubbornly persistent disease that can lead to blindness called diabetic retinopathy. Or helpful could be something a little bigger, like making it easier for scientists to predict floods in India, where seasonal monsoons create catastrophic events almost every rainy season. Through investments in machine learning and AI work, these are the things that we think of when we think about how the technology that we work on inside the company and in partnership with academia makes its way out into the world and becomes helpful. So sometimes this technology isn't just helpful. As I just described, it can sometimes make the difference between literally survival and loss of life, which is extremely helpful. So the key theme here is that our clearest insights about AI lend themselves to this conclusion that its potential is best when it's paired with human intelligence. So one example of that would be the case of breast cancer detection, where our latest research shows that pathologists using algorithms are more accurate and efficient than the pathology or the algorithm alone. So when you combine those things, humans, machines, human intellect and creativity with the data and the science that comes with technology, you start to build a picture of what helpful looks like. So it probably won't surprise any of you that as a company, we're focused, my team is focused on how to tell these stories best, how to bring them to life, how to make them human, discoverable, touchable. That's what we're focused on. And Google as a company didn't follow a particularly conventional corporate roadmap. People used our products, they gave us feedback about what was helpful, and we tried to do more of those helpful things over time. So we went from a company that started in search to a company that now works in maps and photos and hardware, and even helps enterprises to operate their businesses in the cloud every day. So the fact remains that as communication professionals, we're the company's cultural anthropologists. We're the ones that are best positioned to put a face on the Google brand. It's true really in any company. So as a result, I like to think of my team as a group of storytellers. That's really what we do. We're people trained in the PR discipline, but also people with backgrounds in business, backgrounds in human resources, journalists that we've hired from newsrooms literally all over the world. Half of my team in Latin America turns out to have spent many of their formative training years in newsrooms. And so this forms sort of the backbone of the storytelling core that is essentially the heartbeat of our communications team. So this is how we help. That's how our communications team actually lends itself, makes itself sort of most vital to the business and the way that we sort of identify, tell, and reinforce what these stories look like. But as we're out in the world talking about the ways that human and technology intersect, and this sort of Venn diagram of helpful emerges, how do we know that the stories are in fact helping or having any kind of impact? So as a company, we're always balancing these human elements of storytelling with technological elements. We want to make it interesting, we want to make it new, we want to sort of break new ground. And it's a competitive environment in the news environment right now to be new, to tell something to the public that is different and helps describe helpful or something breakthrough. And so if we can't provide proof of the impact that these stories create, ultimately it's very difficult for me to sit down with Sundar Pichai, my boss, our CEO, and help him understand what is the impact that my team is having on the greater business. So the ability to have a real-time pulse on what people care about is invaluable. That's one of the places where I think PR shows up and has this very short twitch, quick twitch kind of muscle that we bring uniquely to the organization. So corporate PR teams have long sought to quantify and qualify their work. This has been sort of the epic struggle within our profession. We don't have the clear line of sight into sales, that direct connection that sometimes marketing would have. They've spent many, many years drawing that very direct line between here are the inputs from a marketing point of view and here's the output from a sales perspective. Often the way that we talk about it looks more like this. How loud was the noise and how good did it sound, right? What is the volume knob and what is the tone knob? It's a pretty simple set of tools and one that really hasn't evolved that much. So what it did evolve into is a desire to understand how were messages pulling through. So it's not just what are you saying, but the extent to which people can recall it, and maybe more importantly, that it spurs action in some way, shape, or form. So at Starbucks, we worked with our agency to develop a global dashboard. So that company does business in 75 countries around the world, and we figured out that 11 of those countries netted us 90% of the world from an audience point of view. So effectively, 11 countries was a global proxy for what we could measure. So that dashboard really became sort of our lifeline. It was the way that we could look at how messages traveled around the world, regardless of language, whether they were landing, whether they were spurring the kind of action or sentiment that we were looking for with audiences. And so you might ask me, okay, well, what does this mean for products? Like, I get all of that. I understand the brand pieces. I understand sort of the rough tools of the trade that you have, but what does this mean for products? So last year, Google launched this, which is the Pixel 3L. And for those of you who've worked in our industry, you understand that when you work in an ecosystem with third-party partners, things leak. Believe me, my whole life this last year has been things leak. And so it leaked. And one of the things that leaked, you can see here this notch at the top. The phone's design leaked. And so the phone had this notch. And for those of you, who haven't used a phone that looks like this, it's literally just that. It's a notch. That notch looked very similar to an Apple phone that came out at roughly the same time. Samsung was having a great time in their ad campaign with a commercial that basically sort of showed an Apple fan with a notch haircut. And internally, our people were quite concerned that, like, what is it about this notch that has people talking? Is it positive for us? Is it negative for us? What should we interpret from that? So based on our measurement approach, we were able to look at preliminary coverage and determine the notch wasn't something that consumers were talking about. Was media talking about it? Yes. Did consumers care? Not so much. And so that information provided the clarity that we needed really to be able to sort of address how we launched the product, how we addressed those questions when they came in, not get distracted by things that didn't matter. It's useful. Sometimes that buzz or that noise, you can be in that vacuum and think this is what matters, and the data will actually set you free, will help you to understand that that's not true. So last week, we announced Google's foray into the gaming industry. We have a new streaming platform called Stadia that we announced at the Gaming Development Conference last week. So we knew it was significant. This was really Google's first step into gaming. We knew there'd be a lot of attention paid to it. So here's what we learned from a measurement point of view. It was sort of an interesting week for us. So here at the top, you'll see that we literally reached every man, woman, and child on the planet. 10 billion potential audience. Now, on the one hand, you look at that and go, how did you do that? On the other hand, it looks like a lot of zeros. You can actually say, right, there's only roughly 7.x billion people on the planet, so I'm not sure about your math. I don't know if that really works. Tell me more about it. So this is by far the biggest and noisiest thing that I've ever been associated with in many years of communicating. So it was hard for me when the measurement team came to us with this data to really be able to sort of put any contextual frame around it. You know, it's hard to explain to your leadership team, we got the whole earth here, kids, in 4 days. That's not a useful message. But what was useful is to compare it to what happened with the rest of GDC from a news point of view. So when we looked at literally every other company and all the other sort of noise, for lack of a better way to put it, that was combined, that gave us sort of the right frame of reference to say we had the impact that we were hoping for. When you're launching something and it's not even touchable or discernible to an audience for months until it becomes an actual product, you want to be able to demonstrate that you've created enough awareness that will lead to trial, that will lead to purchase. That's sort of the classic marketing funnel. So from our point of view, giving this huge number some context, not just a bunch of zeros, was really the key to be able to describe what the next several phases would look like. We kind of knew that we would have a moment where we had to be more specific about titles, we had to be more specific about price, we would have to be more specific about dates. Those moments will come, but this kind of sharpness lent itself to the kind of approach and the kind of learning that I think will help the leadership team to think about that moment when it comes. So earlier this year, I attended an event, a Google event at a military base in San Diego for service members who are transitioning from veteran status to civilian status, the so-called CivMil divide. And I'll tell a little story. So when I was at Starbucks, we did a fair amount of work with veterans. And we were at a base, and one of the veterans that we talked to said, I'm actually more worried about the interviews that I will have to have in the civilian sector than being redeployed back to Iraq. I mean, it really shocked us. It made us sort of stop for a moment and realize just how profound this transition is for the men and women who honorably serve our country. And so this event, fundamentally what we were trying to do is demonstrate the usefulness, the helpfulness of a tool, which is our search box, which everybody has access to via the web, and a military job code, which is really, unless you've served in the military, not something that's all that understandable. It's a series of letters and numbers that really helps to describe the work that you did while you were serving your country, and more importantly, how that work or set of skills can translate to the civilian world. Very important. And so that was the event that we chose to use to demonstrate the product and its usefulness and its helpfulness and make it discoverable and understandable to a broader audience. So I'd like to introduce you to Cassandra. Cassandra is a member of my team. She's also a Navy vet. And one of the ideas that we had at this event was to literally put some of our Google vets on the front line and help to describe for their fellow service people what it was that we were bringing to market, why it mattered to them, how it might have been helpful when they were trying to make that transition. That really made a huge impression, not just on the media who were there to see it, but more importantly, on service members, because I think this then lent itself to the next step in their career process and being able to help navigate that transition in an effective way. So it's moments like this that are the reason why I'm so optimistic, fundamentally optimistic, about technology, because it puts knowledge at people's fingertips. Whether you're a veteran looking for a job, a comms professional trying to measure the impact of your work, it makes daily life more efficient for everyday people while still driving economic growth and opportunities. So if you didn't catch it throughout this presentation, the key word that I'm trying to drive home here is people. I work for a technology company. I've spent many years in the technology industry, but the sort of unifying field for all of that is people. The tools don't mean much without the people using them to discover new planets, cure disease, run their small business without a small army of tech help at hand. So I'm pretty sure that this is what Google's founders intended when they were first forming the company that Fred described as Backrub back in the day. So before Google went public in 2004, Larry Page and Sergey Brin, prior students at Stanford, wrote a founder's letter to prospective shareholders and external constituencies in which they called this document an owner's manual for Google shareholders. Among the many interesting things they said were, Google is not a conventional company and we don't intend to become one. But there was also this. I'm going to read a specific part of this because it's important. Our goal is to develop services that significantly improve the lives of as many people as possible. In pursuing this goal, we may do things that we believe have a positive impact on the world, even if the near-term financial returns are not obvious. Even if they're not obvious, which is interesting. Furthermore, all of this related back to the company's original mission, right? And the original mission of the company was to essentially make information discoverable, universally, and accessible. To organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. That word useful or helpful keeps coming up over and over and over again. So as I think about it, technology plus people equals opportunity. And that's really been the point of the talk tonight that I've been trying to get across. So this is totally in line with our mission. And it's really what I think about when I think about Google and the role that we play in the world, wherever we operate. And it's how I conceptualize our mission when our team is out in the world telling these stories. So the tension between technology and humans, not a new thing. Been there for many, many years. And no doubt it will continue to change the way that we work, and it will continue to be a source of some debate. But it won't replace our ability as communications professionals to build relationships, tell stories of the head and heart, and create the very face of the companies that we work for on a day-to-day basis. So the biggest reason that I believe in the future is because I believe in people. And as long as we're building technology to help people reach their full potential, anything is possible. So with that, the best part of this speech is the next 2.5 minutes where I say nothing and John Oliver talks. And what he'll do in that 2.5 minutes is basically reinforce everything that I've talked about our dystopian robot future or lack thereof. So here's the video. With no volume. It's really funny. Try it again.
And some people are going to lose their jobs, so we should help those that do and be preparing the next generation for the possibility that they may need to be more flexible in their career plans. What do you want to be when you grow up?
I want to be an inventor. Rock star ballerina. I want to be a musician. A nurse. A person who takes people on safari. An stenographer. A fashion designer.
So, are you worried about robots taking over certain jobs?
No.
Okay, you might need to be aware of that long term. Tell you what, you name some jobs and I will tell you whether I think a robot could do it or not, okay?
Policeman.
A robot could do that. That's literally the plot of RoboCop.
So, like at a diner?
No, robots could definitely do that, Zoe, sorry.
Can a robot get wet?
Yeah, robot can get wet. That's not a job, but yes, a robot can get wet.
Fireman.
Robot with a hose, right? Yeah.
A drummer.
Oh, a robot could definitely do the drums.
They'd be probably really bad at basketball.
Robots are actually incredible at basketball.
What? Really?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, look at this. I'm gonna Google robot drummer right now, okay?
Okay.
I just put robot D and it auto-corrected.
And definitely faster than...
You're definitely faster than a robot? Mm-hmm. Here's the thing, you're definitely not. Let me show you this. Lauren, do you think a robot could do my job in the future?
What is your job anyway?
We take a big story and we try and inject it with as much nuance as we can. So we really try and get a deep dive into complicated issues. And then I present our work to the audience at the end of the week. Do you think a robot could do that?
Yep. This is really hard. Well, what can I do?
What can you do? That is actually a good question. You can do a series of non-routine tasks that require social intelligence, complex critical thinking, and creative problem solving, okay?
Okay.
Okay, can you repeat that back to me? I want to do a series of non-routine tasks.
I want to do a series of non-routine tasks.
Tasks?
Tasks.
I feel like you're doing a British accent there, Zoe. That requires social intelligence.
That requires social intelligence.
Complex critical thinking.
What? Complex critical thinking.
And creative problem solving.
And creative problem solving. and creative problem solving.
That's what you got to do in the future, Zoe.
Okay.
Yeah? Okay, is that a deal? We did it!
I don't know what it means.
Okay.
So students, I leave you with this, a lesson from John Oliver and the kids about what our future will look like, and I've never been more optimistic about our potentials. So thank you again for asking me to be here tonight. Have a good evening.
Thanks, Cory. That was not only entertaining, but very funny. Next year, we're going to have a robot instead of you. Or me, yeah. I'm much easier to replace than Cory. But Google's lucky to have someone like you working for them, in my opinion. And Google is an amazing company, and it's no surprise that in our survey this year, when we asked people what platforms are going to be dominant in the future, Google is right at the top of that list because of all the helpful things that they're doing for not only average people, but also for people in the communications industry. And we're going to invite Cory back up for some Q&A after we have our panel. But before I introduce our panel, I want to first thank our partners who helped us develop the Global Communications Report this year. And it's Union Pacific, Zignal Labs, WorldCom, and Davis & Gilbert LLP, a law firm. This year, we distributed our survey to all over the world, and we had 1,500 PR professionals answer it, and about half of those were in agencies, half in-house. We had about 400 students, mostly US, respond. And we had 210 CEOs through CEO Magazine. So we work with all of these groups to find out what's going on in our world. And I want to share a few of those results with you today. This is a copy. I think you all have it. It's online, too. This is our most interesting and I think our most beautiful report. Thank you, Patricia, wherever you are, for designing it. And I hope you all take copies with you and share it with the people you work with and anyone else that you have. We ask questions about change, about marketing, about growth, about society, about media. But the main focus this year was technology and how technology is impacting the public relations business and society. And I'm going to give you a brief overview of some of the findings, and then our panel is going to talk a little more in depth about some of these changes. First of all, expected change. Do people think that there's going to be a lot of change in the PR industry over the next 5 years? The answer is definitely yes, which makes it the most dynamic industry in the world and probably one of the most important to our clients and to our companies. So that's good. What's driving that change? The main thing is technology. All this new technology is changing so fast, and it's incumbent upon us to be able to keep up with it, to stay ahead and remain relevant in this business. When we ask people, we ask CEOs, internal comms people, what areas they would most like to advance in their business through technology, and this is what they told us. If you look at the three things in the middle, audience targeting, measurement results, and most importantly, customer experience optimization, that's hard to say. These are key, tangible business deliverables that are important to them, and technology can help do that. Our client, McDonald's, maybe many of you read about this, made their first acquisition in 20 years this week. And did they buy a food company? Anybody? No. What did they buy? A digital technology firm that is going to allow them, through AI, to better serve their customers. On a hot day when you go to the drive-thru, they'll recommend a lemonade. If you go through and order 2 Happy Meals, they know you're a parent, they're going to suggest a cup of coffee. All this is through AI. And it's the future of McDonald's. I sent a note to their CEO that day, and he said, this is our future. It's all about technology. So, and it's just optimizing the customer experience. And this is a big opportunity for people in PR, because you can communicate with the technology we have today. You can communicate with a customer at every step of the journey that they have with a brand and make an impact on them. And I think this is, we call it CXPR, and I think that's the next big thing in terms of what we're doing. The next question is, how are we doing with tech? We ask CEOs, we ask agencies, and we ask in-house communicators. And you can see, I think since we're at a school, I'll give this a grade, I'd say it's sort of like a B-. There's not very many people that think they're using technology to its most effectiveness in their organizations. As Cory mentioned, marketing has been doing this for a long time in advertising, measuring everything that they do. We're playing catch up here, but we're doing okay, but we have a long way to go, and that's part of the reason we did this survey, to show people what the opportunities are with technology and how better to use it and embrace it in the future. We listed about 15 different areas that can be impacted by technology, and we listed the tools that do each one of these, and there's a glossary in the back of this report that explains those tools. What you'll see here, we ask, what is important to you now and what is important to you in the future? The most important things to PR people today are media monitoring, which is something that's been around for decades. It's still going to remain important. But in the future, you're going to see social media and website analytics becoming super important technology tools, along with influencer identification and customer relationship management. These are the areas that you should be focused on in your business, for your clients, and for your companies. When you look a little further down the spectrum to newer technologies, as you can see, a lot of things in terms of voice assistants, bots, augmented reality are not considered very important now by very many people. They're going to increase in the future, but I think they're going to increase in importance lots more than people are saying. These are areas that are going to be particularly important for us. And if you look at artificial intelligence, which actually isn't a tool, it's a platform that impacts all of these different tools. Right now, only 3% of public relations people think that this is an important tool for their work. Because I think, and the reason is, I think because they don't really understand what artificial intelligence is all about. We asked them, and about over 80% said they don't really understand the impact of artificial intelligence on their business right now. And I think it's because they're thinking of it as Ready Player One or the Terminator, some ominous thing that's going to change our lives, when really, when you use Siri on your phone, that's artificial intelligence. When Amazon sends you a recommendation, that's artificial intelligence. When I ordered an Uber to come to USC today, that's artificial intelligence. It's part of our world already. And for the PR and communications profession, it's more about just managing data and analytics in a really smart, effective way. But we did ask PR people how they thought the media would be impacted by artificial intelligence. And we said, in the next 5 years, how many stories, what percentage of the stories do you think are going to be written by machines? And here's what they said. Financial reporting, about 35%. Students were a little more accurate. Sports coverage, 30%, and so on. We have on our panel tonight, we're happy to have Edith Moy, who's from Bloomberg. She manages this process, and Edith will tell you that Bloomberg is already at this number today. So this is not a number that's going to happen 5 years from now. This is a number that's happening already. But a lot of people in the communications world don't really understand that that's taking place. We also asked them what impact this new communications technology was going to have on society. And the good news is 61% of PR people thought that it was going to make citizens more engaged. And that's good. We want people more engaged, right? But the same amount, 61%, said they're going to be more engaged based on misinformation. That's not good news. And finally, almost 75% 3/4 of the people we surveyed said that our world is going to become more polarized because of communications technology. And it's hard to imagine it's going to be more polarized than it is right now, but that's what people are predicting in the future. So, as Cory said, technology is going to enable a lot of interesting things, but it also has another side that we have to be very careful about, particularly in the communications environment. And finally, the slide that he referenced before is what's more important in the future, the human element or the technology element. You can see that PR professionals believe that human element is, but the younger people coming into a profession believe that technology will reign. And that's one of the topics that I think that our panel will give you some deep insight into. So read through this survey. It's got a lot of great information. I hope you'll enjoy it and find it productive. And now I want to introduce our panel. First, as Cory referenced, and I was going to talk about this, but he already did it, his boss for 10 years, Melissa Wagner, is going to moderate our panel. Melissa is the founder and CEO of what was Wagner Edstrom and is now We Communications. She is also on our board here at USC, and she is not only has a wonderful public relations agency, which I admire and respect and compete against all the time, but she's also a wonderful person and is involved in many good causes around the world. And I want to invite Melissa up on stage, and I want to invite our other panelists who are with us today. Alex Smith from Zignal. Please, Alex, come up. Gary Brotman from Qualcomm, and Edith Moy from Bloomberg. Please have a seat.
Good morning. You want me
Now,
here or there? I'll go ahead.
you can sit if you don't mind. Now, let me tell you how this is going to work. Because this is being broadcast on Facebook Live, if we have questions from the audiences, they won't be heard. So there is a sheet of paper in front of you, an index card. If you write a question on that for anybody on the panelists or for Cory, they will, and pass that to the aisle. We'll pick them up, and I'll ask those questions to our panelists after they finish their discussion. So anytime you have a question, just write it down and pass it to the end of the aisle, okay? Everybody got that? All right, now I'm going to turn it over to Melissa. Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you, Fred, and thank you for Annenberg for caring so much about this topic, which I actually think tonight we're just scratching the surface on, really, and we'll be talking about it for decades. It strikes me, thank you, Cory, for that shout out. It strikes me that we're going to probably come full circle to what you said about technology and people. There's a plus sign between it, and it strikes me before we introduce ourselves. I just wanted to ask you, how many of you were intrigued by the pilot who flew the airplane? He was supposed to go to Germany, which, by the way, is south, and instead he went north. And he said that the computer told him to do that. And I guess what we're going to talk about a lot here is, why didn't he say, why did the computer ask him to go somewhere else? So I think that if you think about the pairing of the human mind and creativity and curiosity and technology, that's the perfect solution. So with that, I'm going to have this panel talk about themselves in a sentence or two, because they are the greatest group of people, and I think will shed light from every single angle. We've got everybody represented here, and so why don't you start, Alex? We had a great dinner last night, by the way, and he could talk forever.
Oh, I know. Yeah, I'll keep it super concise. Yeah, so I'm Alex. I'm with Zignal Labs, ex-NASA JPL employee. Last time I was here at USC, we delivered the spaceship, so really glad to be back here with you guys and show you guys some cool stuff today.
I'm Gary Brotman. I am head of AI strategy and product planning at Qualcomm. If you have an Android phone, you probably have our chips in them. I'm responsible for ensuring that our entire portfolio of silicon is able to take what are today's state-of-the-art AI algorithms and run them on your phone or any other device without the need for a connection in the cloud. And in a prior life, I was a journalist and a PR major, and I worked with Fred.
I guess I represent the other side on this panel today. So my name is Edith. I am a managing editor for the data-driven news at Bloomberg News. I have been with the company for 18 years now, and many years, moons ago, I was just like you. I was a graduate of Annenberg School of Journalism as well. So have been working with Bloomberg for a very long time, mostly doing breaking news and covering North American financial markets. In the last few years, Bloomberg, as a technology company, we have been really, really emerging in the use of technology. And also in the newsroom, I run a team of editors who are also project managers. We implement technology solutions and the tools into the global newsroom to help our reporters bring more news.
So we should just get started actually right on that topic because, and I'm going to swing off of all of the stuff that's in the report. Fred shared that so much of our business of news is already being written by, and many of us may or may not know that depending upon who you are, if you're older or if you're younger. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how technology and innovation is already being used in the newsroom?
So in our line of work in the real-time financial business, data and the emergence of a lot of the numbers is really, really important. And for Bloomberg has always been the pioneer in technology and also data. And for our line of work and using doing breaking news, it is very important for us to stay competitive because all of our readers, mostly their Wall Street clients, they use our information to make investment decisions. A lot of them use them to trade. So we have always been in a very competitive space to try to deliver the news in real time. And in real time, I mean the deadline is in seconds. So without technology, it's very hard for us to do that. When in a competitive setting. So for many years, I have seen the emergence of breaking news, that's being covered by humans asking questions, taking notes, to now, we use a variety of different tools to help us to find the news, to monitor the news, to also find the analytics, to break the news. So for us, technology has always been the part of our DNA, in the newsroom, and is very important.
So let's swing off of that and talk, Alex, a little bit about bots. Let's talk about the good and bad of bots and your point of view.
So at Zignal, probably about right around the end of the 2016 election, we were noticing giant, massive volumes of data for one particular candidate, more than the others combined. And so it led us to do a lot of research and figure out why. And part of the why was that half of it was all fake. There's a balance between bots being good and bad. In cases where they're meant to drive us all apart and polarize us, yeah, absolutely, that's a bad thing. But as a brand, I've seen so many cases of actually using bot networks for positive benefit. So say they were to share statistically 5 hashtags all the time, great, you can amplify your message with them because they'll pick up your hashtag. Conversely, I've seen an acquisition go really good because a bot network was pretending to be the target intended market. And, I was wondering, why is this a perfect story 6 months ahead of that? I'm like, this is too perfect. Perfect doesn't happen. But there it was. And then 6 months later, giant acquisition happens and it makes perfect sense. So, yeah, I think it's a balance between, it comes down to the user. You have to be an ethically good person to be doing things with bot networks.
And Gary, you kind of come from both sides, the technology that you're steeped in, and also you've been a former PR practitioner. So what do you think about AI? Is it good for us to, be invoking with our clients? And
I think you have to. It's essential. If I go back to when I was studying in college, when I was getting my journalism degree, one of the reasons why I actually went into PR was because I could blend the credibility of news with the creativity of advertising. PR sat right in the middle, at least from my perception, when I was in school. One of the reasons why I didn't want to go into journalism was because I knew what I was going to have to do early on, and it was going to be a lot of the formulaic block and tackle, writing obits, and the work that is just mundane and not creative at all. And I really like to express my opinion, as you saw last night. That's all work that humans don't have to do. We just don't need to anymore. AI it's overblown in its it being something that turns an inanimate device into something sentient. Today, it's not like that. It's really just efficiency. It's about automation and making things faster. You can get some of the processes out of the way that actually bog you down and can free up the cycles in your thinking and your creativity so you can do bigger, better things. So I look at both sides, and I see why people would think that AI is threatening, but there's so many ways that it can be a practical tool in everything that we do.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that brings us to this other theme that stood out about operating in this accelerated environment, and the pace of technology and change is so dramatic. And then you ask the question, because our ability to keep up with it, to your point, is actually all around that. Like, we have to keep up, we have to be ahead. I guess I asked the question, the role of artificial intelligence can talk a lot about what, but it can't get into why. It can't get into the emotion. It can't, make a judgment call when judgment's what's needed. When human curiosity about, well, maybe I should listen as a pilot to where the plane is going and ask a question like, well, why? So let's talk a little bit about that. And Gary, let's just keep on you for just a second. Why don't you give some context to the audience about right now in your mind, when you project to the future, what you think their jobs as PR practitioners will most utilize AI for?
Well, I think it's going to start off with the process-related work, things that you can, or that are repetitive. So if you are taking your cue and looking at how you generate a news article for earnings or for sports, again, something that's more formulaic than creative, you could apply the same technology to writing a first draft of a press release. And you have all the cues, you have your brief, and the AI will write that first draft, and you don't have to spend so much time on reviews and rewrites and edits, and then you can move on to the rest of the campaign. That's an instrument, and that's one instrument of many in your toolkit. And if you don't have to spend so much time on that piece, you can move on to being more creative with the rest of the overall campaign. So that's one example, but I think there will be many regardless of the marketing discipline.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And Edith, you started to tell us a little bit about in the newsroom already what's already being written by a machine. Do you think that people who read and take in what you put out care about the origin of the stories?
From our experience in the newsroom, no. Our clients demand quality. They want it fast. They want good data. They want insights. They want analysis, and they basically want information that it can put them with an edge and be able to pass around to other clients as well. It makes no difference whether it is a human being or a machine that will write it for them, as long as it maintains the same quality. And this is something that we really, really strive for Bloomberg to do, is either programming a software or we write a really good copy, we still have the same standard.
Mm-hmm. So then in terms of efficiency and effectiveness, you were talking a lot, Gary, about how that's where AI would come in from an efficiency standpoint mostly. Let's turn to you then and talk a little bit about, the work that you do and do it every day obviously tells us a lot about efficiency and micro-targeting and making sure that we're hitting the right person at the right time. It strikes me that there was someone, it was almost 100 years ago, where someone said, I'm doing advertising and 50% of the time it's successful, but I don't really know what 50%. So why don't you talk a little bit about that in terms of then how would you, go about looking at that and micro-targeting and making sure that the business was very effective?
Yeah, so
not just efficient, but effective.
Yeah, I think it's, when it comes down to filtering out what's, first step is get rid of what's fake, essentially, and look at what's real. And then look at the network of people and how things spread amongst them. And that's another one of these applications of, say, artificial intelligence is there's 4 of us up here, and statistically, us 2 are connected, you 2 are connected, and, 5 words statistically flow through us over all the history of all of our conversations. So when you really want to understand a group and understand how things filter through them. It's just looking at the entire network of the group, who are my friends, who are my followers, and as well, what do we talk about? What do we actually converse about both ways? It's not just a one-way feed of the world. It's how people interact and spread the information. And from there, you get a really good idea of, especially at a micro-targeting, micro-influencer level of where I'm going, where I need to take it, and as well from a measurement perspective, like especially feeding them in and monitoring them and seeing, is it sticking to them specifically.
You quoted something last night that you said something like, just for 150 likes. Why don't you share that?
So it's a pretty old stat from maybe like 2010, 2011, before there was a thumbs down or any of the emotion kind of buttons on Facebook. But at that point in time, you could model and understand a person's preferences better than their spouse could with 150 likes. And that was like 2010. And that's only changed since we've added, the proliferation of emojis. What does an emoji mean to me? Because that captures crazy amounts of emotion in it. And same thing with, everything else across the board. So I think it's a new age we live in terms of capturing that emotion especially and understanding it.
He did say better than your spouse. I mean, okay. Let's turn to ethics now, which is something we were getting at a little bit at the front part of this day. And, it strikes me that the question really is, how much knowledge is too much knowledge? And also, who's really then writing what we consume? And I obviously, and you were talking, Cory, a little bit about this as well, feel that our jobs, all of our jobs, is really to find the truth and really to be certain that transparency is what we tell our clients and that we're seeking that all the time. And so if that's the case, then we take a look at, let's start with you actually, this era of fake news, and I'm going to change the question from the way I wrote it. What responsibility then do you feel you have as an organization to get in there and make sure that you fact check information and that it's really the right information?
Information for us journalists always is the cardinal rule, right? That I learned here in this school is accuracy always comes first. And I think in our line of work, whether it is using machine learning and to program large sets of data to produce content or to verify a source of information, the information integrity and the data integrity is really important. And from our experience, that integrity and that confirmation has to come from a human decision, a human judgment. Someone who has experience, someone who has seen the news, who understands the topic type, and be able to verify this information whether it's right or not. That type of decision, it's very hard to program a machine. Know that we can, it's possible, but I'm sure but it takes a tremendous amount of effort to program just one single thought and decision process that we as a human process we can experience and be able to make a judgment very quickly. So I think in that sense, in terms of the duality between interacting with technology and machine learning and our human judgment, the machine is really good at telling you what is happening, but it's just horrible at telling you why this is happening. We still need humans and judge and editors in the newsroom to see, okay, this piece of news is genuine or this piece of news is fake, because machines are not capable of doing that as of right now.
And you've heard from someone who is a trusted source, and that's not true of everything in this world. And I know that there's more scrutiny than ever for technology companies now to be certain that they have oversight in their ethics and that they are held to a different standard. And so, Gary, I'd love to hear a little bit from you in terms of government regulation and privacy. Give us your thoughts on how that might actually impact the respective businesses and how we now communicate then with all our stakeholders.
Well, from an ethical and policy standpoint, I don't think there's really any settled approach. I mean, there's a lot of fear and concern that, A, the data you've chosen may not be the right data. B, the entire process has a human. And every human is biased in one way, shape, or form. So if you're training a neural network using deep learning to identify something as simple as a cat, my perception of what constitutes a cat could be different than Alex's perception. And the resulting model may not have the same accuracy to identify that cat. So there's multiple steps in the process where there is bias in human decision being made, and then is it the right decision? And if it's as benign as the cat detector, that's one thing. But if you're making a decision about somebody's credit score or whether you're going to give them a loan and things around racial bias and other things creep in because that algorithm was programmed by a human, that's where I think it gets a little sticky. And that's at least the problem that we face today. At least that's one of the concerns. And then how are you just going to end up using these algorithms? Is it going to be for good or is it going to be for evil? If you don't have the right data set and then you are making some subjective decisions, they may be benign, but the tool itself could still be used for ill will. But there are literally, I don't know any country around the globe that doesn't have some regulatory body, private or government regulatory body. You see this in China. China's making a big move here, and in Europe. We're just now starting to, I think our administration put out a statement. I wouldn't say it has teeth, but it's a statement. But we have a ways to go before that gets settled.
Alex, why don't you answer the same question?
Yeah, I mean, I guess in terms of ethics and government stuff, I guess what we would be seeing on our end, I mean, what I anticipate anyways, would be more probably anonymized data sets. I mean, you start to see it now with Facebook, and I think they've done actually a pretty good job at protecting people. But I also think, on the other hand, that it is a game of cat and mouse, that the more you anonymize data sets, the more services there are to unanonymize them. So I think, that's the unfortunate side of it. I don't know. I think ultimately, the solution, me personally, could just be full transparency on the thing. People with black hats, we just want to know how things work. If they were all open, we would just help.
How do you respond to that conversation around government regulation? How does that strike you from a different, as you say, perspective?
From my standpoint, in terms of regulation, I mean, I do think that we have ways to go, for this country to recognize, that the emergence of AI and machine learning, there's large data sets now that is being used as being that's being used for all sorts of different ways. Is it properly regulated? Well, we don't really know. The sector is still very murky, and that's great grounds for us to write a lot of stories. For us and journalists, these are interesting topics, types that we will write about. But I do share your view that in terms of the data is very. How do we govern the data, and how do we control the data? How do we clean the data, and to turn a very benign set of information? Do we have the capability to be able to enforce it for good use or bad use? I think right now it's very hard. It's very hard to do, and we're as an industry, I don't think we're there yet to be able to show evidence of saying, we have consistent processes that we can verify whether we're doing something good or not. It's about intent. So data training itself is still very, in my view, I still feel that we're very young in this space. So there's still a lot of things that we have to learn about.
There is one sector, which is automotive. And we were talking about this last night. You also were talking about how do you know, let's say the data was pristine, there was little bias in the training. How do you know what's going on under the hood? Because even the brightest PhD doesn't really know how a neural network processes that data. It's a black box. And when you get to things like level 5 autonomy with vehicles that are completely on their own, and you trust them. There's no steering wheel, right? You are out in the road, and you're also a pedestrian walking across the street. The government's going to mandate that you know why that decision was made if you hit a human versus a tree. The AI itself has to be explainable, and there's a whole separate discipline around explainable AI. I've seen some stuff in vision where the algorithm itself will create a heat map for over an image or a picture that it saw to give you some directional guidance as to what the region was that they were focused on. But that's still pretty coarse level. So at the highest level, if you're talking about regulation, if there's health and safety involved, that's probably where you're going to need things to be explainable under the hood. So the rest of it, I agree. It's just kind of Wild West, and there's a lot of experimentation, and it's moving so fast. It used to be that you write a white paper and you publish it and you have peer review for 6 to 12 months, and then somebody decides to commercialize that technology or that idea. We have customers that are seeing white papers show up on the internet, and in 2 weeks we have pressure to commercialize. There's no peer review. Somebody did the test, and everything's fine. The algorithm works. We try it, it goes. It's mind-boggling how quick it moves. So to be able to capture that and to control that inertia is very difficult.
Mm-hmm. Well, so why don't we turn our attention then to how does all of the way it is today affect all of our jobs, and spend a little bit more time there. What skills would you recommend people in the audience get very proficient at, and how would you prioritize those? Now, why don't we start with you?
So I have a bit of a bias because I come from a journalism background. So in this, I would say this is if you are going to be immersed in a space where you will be using a lot of information, you are in a career that you will be analyzing and gesting a lot of information for commercialization purposes, or for journalists, you're analyzing a lot of information to write a good story. More and more, I would appeal that everyone should learn a bit about coding. There's a lot of coding language out there that is excellent for data analysis. This is important because more and more media outlets, including ours, we're using technology to assist us in writing our news content. And more, I have seen our journalist career has shifted from writing on notepads to Word to now we use programming code, and we work with engineers to write a story template. So I would say, as a skill, it is important to learn about some basic programming skills that would be helpful. And if you're into analyzing large amount of information, data analytical skills, SQL will be helpful as well.
Mm-hmm. Both of you.
Go ahead. I guess I'm biased too, and I would say data visualization. So really making big pictures out of data. Most engineers don't know how to do that, surprisingly. That's what I do all the time. So if you're like a creative type, you love drawing, art, learn how to visualize. The best thing I ever figured out how to do was to figure out how to use my own brain and how to visualize data to show people and tell stories. That's my biggest recommendation.
I'd say purely from AI, I've never written a line of code. I tried to take a Python course, and I made it through like 2 weeks online, and I'd like to do it just to say I did it, but I don't have time to, and I don't need to. Like I said, things are moving very quickly. If you want to learn about AI at the highest possible level, just what is it and what is it not, and how is it impacting business and products, I highly recommend a class called AI for Everyone. It's taught by Andrew Ng, who is one of the top luminaries in the business. He ran Baidu Research, he ran Google Brain, and he has a series of courses on Coursera.com, Coursera? Yeah,
Yes.
Yes. All on deep learning, every level of technical proficiency. But this course is relatively new. Will give anybody who doesn't really fully understand the domain enough working knowledge to be able to then decide which direction do you want to take it. I don't think you have to write code. Has anybody used WordPress? Did you write code? Did you write HTML before that? Right? You're not going to have to do that with AI. There are tools out right now that do all that for you. All the training is abstracted. Data sets are out there for you. I don't think that the technical side of it, you will have to have some, but don't get freaked out by, oh my God, I got to learn Python and I have to write code and become an engineer, because it's just not the case. I think that's my view.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I guess I would add from the communications perspective that, to the point of understanding data and being able to analyze it, yes, but also make big data small data. And what I mean by that, I guess, is that, we're being asked to come up with an insight very quickly. And to the point of exponential speed, you can't, if there's a crisis or there's something you need to get done, you cannot sit around even for 5 minutes. You have to immediately say, what's the data telling me? Here's what you need to do. And it needs to be something that's very, based in critical thinking, based in the data, but you get to the insight faster. So that would be something that I would recommend for everybody, is be skilled at picking out of everything that you see, what's the nugget? What's the most important thing that's going to move people to action? So any adds to that?
You just proved the human-machine pairing, right? Because that tool is going to get you to making a decision quickly, or giving you the data to make that decision. And in a crisis situation, it's your creativity that's going to make that work. That AI has no idea how to address a multifaceted problem in the real world. Mm-hmm. So the two are going to be together. Human and technology, or psychology and technology, they're intertwined.
Well, and I think now, should we go to audience questions? Because we actually, yes? Or no? I have many more. Okay, that's what we'll do. We'll write on the cards. We'll pass it to the... Because one of the things before we start, so while you're doing that, I want to ask each panelist, are you afraid of AI in any sense? And if you are, what would that be? And on the other side, and then we'll get to the questions, are you euphoric about anything that AI will deliver?
I guess for me, I'm not really afraid of it. I get that at this point, we call it more of augmented intelligence. Like you said, it's the human and machine together. We're not at Terminator yet. We have very, very little to be afraid of. Yet. No, I think the only thing I would be afraid of, if I were completely wrong and everything right now, this whole polarization and everything were from an AI, but I don't think that's the case. So yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Mm-hmm. Euphoric?
Oh, I'm highly, are you euphoric?
Oh, I forgot. Euphoric. I guess I get really excited for the conveniences that this technology will enable, like the little things that I don't need to think about, that it just knows preferences that statistically I prefer, and it's going to help me save seconds, and all those little seconds add up and matter.
Mm-hmm.
I am worried about what AI has done to accelerate the spread of misinformation and destroy facts and reality. Mm-hmm. But it's not the tool so much as it is the application of the tool. And every technology has been used for good and evil that I can think of, nefarious means or altruistic. There'll always be cat and mouse, but I'm hopeful that good will always trump. Oh, sorry. Good will, yeah. Good will
I wonder
always
how
win.
often he's used that phrase.
I'd be in so much trouble. But to be honest with you, Google, in my view, is a beacon for how to do this all right. And when you have the consumer in mind, you have the world in mind, and you are also the steward of the world's data. I think that's a huge responsibility in the execution that Google has had, and we've done a lot of work with Google on the AI front. That gives me a whole lot of hope. There are a lot of other participants, but I think Google stands out as an example, specifically in the consumer world, because there's so much that you do with Google technology that is the most incredible state-of-the-art AI, and you'd never know it.
Well, that's a good transition. Thanks, Gary. And I'd like to ask Cory a question about Google, or just the tech world in general. It seemed like, Melissa, you all have perspective on this, but it seemed like 10 years ago, tech was the darlings of the media, and everyone was oohing and awing over every new product, and nobody could do anything wrong. And now there's this sort of what you call tech-lash, where people are now more critical of technology companies than ever before. But as Gary said, Google's doing so many things right. How do you deal with that sort of new perception of technology companies that's less positive than it used to be?
Try to see if this is on or not. I don't think I had a hot. Okay,
There
here we
you
go. Well, look, I mean, I think that it's back to the slide that I presented, this idea that with great power comes great responsibility. And I think that, we certainly see with each passing year what we believe our responsibility is, both to the consumer, as you mentioned, but also just to society. And frankly, if I think back on the amount of times that our company has given testimony, not just in front of Congress here in this country, but elsewhere around the world, I think we've just fundamentally had to sort of flip a switch internally and say we have to embrace this. And so I think part of this storytelling that I spoke about before is the idea that you have to be prepared at some level of granularity to talk about what was discussed earlier, what's under the hood, and to bring subject matter experts to that discussion who can actually help with some degree of precision to actually explain fairly complex topics like AI and machine learning and some of the things that we've been investing in for many, many years and are probably still misunderstood to some extent. So I'm not sure that we're too focused on, do things get negative? I think it's more about, what is our responsibility and how do we meet that in the right place? And we haven't always gotten it right, but I think that's our commitment.
And Melissa, you've worked with a little company called Microsoft for a long, long time, and you sort of brought them into the limelight to be a really famous company. How do you perceive that same issue in terms of how technology is the perception is changing?
Well, I suppose it's a cop-out to say ditto. Yes, I mean, you have a company in Microsoft who takes it also very seriously from the ground up. And you have a CEO at Microsoft who also consider it's a personal responsibility of he and his leadership team. And so you have a team of people who, even recently when Brad Smith, who's president of Microsoft, pushes for regulation with facial recognition now, because he thinks that's the only technology right now that's ready really for the regulators who don't understand everything quite yet to regulate and to take a look at. So I think you've got a company who is saying, we need to regulate it in the right way. The technology companies need to do that themselves. We need to audit ourselves, and they're very, very focused on that as well.
Good, thank you. Edith, a number of questions for you. First, if Bloomberg is developing a third of their stories now with machines, what does that look like in 5 years? And then part two is, does Bloomberg say which articles are written by machines, and why or why not would they identify that? It's, in a story you'd usually have the byline who the reporter is. Does it say by Hal or?
I'll answer your second question first.
Right.
So transparency is a very important DNA, for our firm. So every single machine-assisted story is going to be shared a byline with a human editor. I have many articles that has been written proudly by Edith Moy and also Bloomberg Automation. And we're very proud to share this byline. There are some stories that is entirely generated by our machine, by our software. Then those will be clearly say it is written by Bloomberg Automation. And if our clients have questions about it, there's also a phone number that they can call, and there will be a human being who will be answering that at the end of that line.
And where do you go from to a third of the stories being written in 5 years? What percent do you think that will be, if you have any guess?
I think we're going to. I think we will do more, and in terms of usage of technology to assist in our reporting and also in our content creation, we're only going to expand and do more because, again, we have such powerful data and analytics. Bloomberg is founded as a financial data and technology company, and so we have all of these resources that's available to us, that it will be silly not to use more of it and to see what other types of content we can produce, using the data and the analytics and the resources that we have. And a lot of the origins of this content has always been, how can we provide our clients who demands the very best in terms of the financial news. Not only they want fast, but they also want good and insightful things. And so therefore, in the story content space, the only way for us to get better and to add more value-added content that only human editors can write is to use machine to help us to lay out the details and the what. So in 5 years' time, I would say we will probably expand and do more.
Okay, good. But you don't know how much. You're not going to guess how much. A lot more.
Don't have the crystal ball.
Move on.
All right, Cory. What is the biggest misconception people have about Google?
Biggest misconception? Probably just that they don't know us that well as people. So I kind of talked about this in my talk earlier too, that I think the team, you'll see us do more in the coming days, months, weeks, years, to put a human face on the company. And I think the other thing is that people believe that we are creatures of the valley, and therefore that's pretty much where the entire company is based. That's where all the thinking comes from. That's pretty much the sun, moon, and stars. And yet, we have 100,000 of us now literally all over the world. I had the pleasure this week of being able to spend some time outside the valley with my team. And when I think about the things that we're doing in the US, for example, we have a program called Grow with Google that's actually putting data centers in the center of the country, creating thousands of jobs, partnerships with local universities. So I think those are the things that perhaps are a hangover, or maybe they're old tapes about the company. And so that's the team's job, I think, is to help dimensionalize the humanity of what we're doing and to show that, we're your neighbors, we're your friends, we may be your family, and that we show up in more places than just the Silicon Valley.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of questions for you, Cory. Here's an easy one. Where do you get your news?
Google News. Hello.
Who wrote that?
Sorry, I know that sounds pretty obvious.
I'm going to ask the same question to Gary. Where do you get your news, Gary?
3 primary sources. This one, Associated Press, and Reuters.
Reuters. So some traditional outlets, okay.
Just the facts.
And Alex, how about you?
So I like to get a really, non-biased sense of I don't want to get siloed into what I'm supposed to read. So I actually use Apple News because the full spectrum comes on there, so I can see what all the viewpoints are, I guess. And then the rest is from Telegram with all my nerd buddies.
And Melissa?
Well, I should say, actually, from Alex, Reddit, and everywhere else, really.
All right, Reddit's a good source. Alex, what are you're providing? You're a vendor to a lot of companies and agencies, and what are they asking you for that you can't provide yet? What are they looking for? What's going to be happening in the next few years that's going to be sort of solving some of these problems that people are looking for?
Well, I think Facebook is one that, Facebook, they kind of cut us all off, a few years ago for obvious reasons. That's always going to be a big one because it's a huge silo of data. And I think geo as well has always been a big one. I can estimate where a person is at within some relatively good, if you say in your profile, I live in Los Angeles, California, great, you get a dot in the city of LA. But it's, 1% of people use an actual fine lat-long geotag. I'm right here, right now. And so that's the hard part, is understanding, the movement of people, the geo sentiment, and as well the regional sentiment to say, I'm in LA and I'm talking trash about New York, right? It's that type of geo-based directional sentiment too that I think is interesting. And putting that all together, I think for the long term is just micro-influence based upon that. How things statistically move through a tiny group of people and who is the influencer.
And Gary, expanding, you're looking at it from a technology company perspective. What are your customers looking for? What do you want to be able to provide from an AI perspective in the future? What's the holy grail for you guys?
Our current strategy is to enable devices to be autonomous, to provide the services, the user experiences that are machine learning and AI powered without the need for a connection. Your phone today can do so much without having a connection to the cloud or to a data source. To give you an example, like Google Lens today, there's a lot of context that can be brought down to the phone with Google Lens if you're looking at the world around you for objects and landmarks. But so much of that detection is happening immediate real time locally on the phone, so you get instantaneous response. It's instant gratification. So the balance between how much that companion or that person, the utility you have in your pocket, or whatever that device is, can actually deliver a better experience and also bring more to you with cloud-enabled data. That's where we focus our time. The thing that I think our customers, or at least the trend that we see, vision is kind of not a settled domain, but it's pretty mature. Voice UI is the biggest area that our customers are interested in, and even just recognizing sounds around you. If the phone that you have or the speaker can recognize a glass breaking, like the window, somebody breaks in, or recognizes you and they're your companion. That speaker is your companion. It's no longer your utility. If you're doing some of that processing on the phone as well as in the cloud, that local processing is going to make that speaker not so much an inanimate object in a utility, but it is a companion. You have a conversation, not just a command and control. That's probably one of the bigger domains that we look at today.
But nobody thought voice assistants were going to be very important for communications. How do you see them playing into the role of communicating?
If I look at it through transcription and translation, if you're interviewing a client or you're working with a client overseas or dealing with somebody who speaks a different language, natural language processing is enabling you to get very quick translation from any language. I mean, you guys just did this.
Duplex is pretty amazing.
Yeah,
It's in a very early
duplex,
place.
Yeah. And so real-time transcription as well. I don't have to take my notes and key them in. I can just speak to my phone and not have a separate recorder, and that's instantly transcribed and it can just be disseminated to anybody. So that could apply to communications, PR. In journalism, there is one outlet that we've talked to who's actually using object detection and people recognition when they go to government events, like go to the state House of Representatives. You don't remember everybody's name, but you hold up your camera and you can identify who those representatives are by the model that was trained for that purpose. It's instant and they move on. They don't have to go hunting around and look for an administrative assistant. So there are additional benefits.
You just point your phone at someone and
it just identifies the people.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
I want one of those.
Yeah.
This is for Edith and Melissa. If machines are writing stories, what's the possibility that PR people will have machines pitching the stories to your machines?
Well, I don't know. Would you accept that?
Only if it's machine readable.
Oh, there you go.
Melissa, have you invested into robots that would pitch stories to her robots?
I will say this, though.
This got dark fast.
I will say this, though, is that one of the very important aspect in us covering breaking news is that because the news comes in real time and then we have to synergize it and provide a very quick content to our trading clients very quickly. Whenever we have a question, we would like to be able to actually find a actual human person, a very friendly investor relations person who will be able to answer our questions right away. And so it is more about augmenting the story about, okay, this news just happened. Why is this happening, and what is the color? You can't have a robo PR person to be able to answer that.
So
And I would add,
safe.
well, yes. I would add that we've been talking a lot about news, but not about stories that change minds and change behavior and evoke emotion and get us thinking in different ways. And you're not trying to either. You're very clear on what will be automated and what won't be automated. And I look at that and I say, well, so our people just have to be more responsible about getting into the facts, getting quickly to the insight, but then also being able to be compelling in terms of the stories that they tell. And being certain that they're telling them to the right person at the right time, and that they know what action they really want from it, so that influence really does happen. So I actually like it, the fact that a lot of the automation piece, a lot of the piece that's more rote, has to happen really fast, is going to be done, so that we can focus, to Gary's earlier point, on the stories that really are harder to tell, are more complex, and teach people and or compel people to do something that's really different.
Gary, you mentioned this just briefly, but there's a question from the audience. What impact will AI have on these cultural biases? We have a professor here that's written a book about the algorithms of race, and points out that search and some of these devices have a racial bias built into them. And I wondered, or Cory, you could address this too, because a lot of that is through search. But how do you see that getting better or worse or over time?
I think the more data you have, the better the algorithm can get,
Uh-huh.
so the mistakes would be fewer. But I think that I mentioned this earlier, the human in the loop and the bias of the individual, be it subtle and benign or nefarious in nature, still has an impact. But there are algorithms that are training algorithms. So it's evolving very quickly, but I do think the bias that is built in today, I mean, Microsoft's run into a couple of things too, where people look like animals, and it has caused some problems, but it's just time and data and the maturity of the market. We're in a very early stage of this current phase of AI. This isn't the first time this has happened. It just so happens that we have powerful computers, lots of data, and some really smart people with a lot of open source tools who can innovate very fast. So these things will correct, and then we'll probably move on to the next problem.
But that also speaks, Fred, to the importance of diversity as a business issue.
Yeah.
So, when you think about just the inherent bias that goes into something that is human created, an algorithm, I think the more diverse the workforce, obviously, the better the opportunity that you have to eliminate some of those biases, or at least balance them over the course of, literally every single person who works for your company. I mean, this is why I think the business rationale for why tech is so focused on diversity as a core business issue. It's not about numbers per se. It's really about creating products that can be trusted by everybody.
And you'll see that in our survey. We have a question about what societal issues are PR people most likely to address, and diversity and inclusion was off the charts compared to every other issue. It's the top issue that I think communications people want to feel like we need to address in the future. We talked about the increasing polarization that's predicted. Do you think that there's an element of this technology that can bring people closer together instead of making them further apart? Alex, you're shaking your head.
I mean, I think so. It just needs to be an explicit kind of purpose. I don't think there's really an organization that's necessarily tasked with bringing everybody together, but I think the tools existed to bring us apart. They have to exist to bring us back.
Anybody else comment on that?
I look at it as it's not so much a technology problem, but the technology helped create the problem. So I'm a believer that it will also help solve the problem. Somehow, folks learned how to, or excuse me, what's the right term? We're no longer as tolerant. Many of us are no longer as tolerant. We've kind of rallied around our tentpole belief, and we're clinging to it. Some of that was technology driven, some of it was societal. And I do believe that the algorithms that maybe help accelerate that behavior can also help unwind it and find those common ground, like what Zignal Labs does. those are the subtleties. It's almost like the subconscious. It's not, you can't address this as a brand problem. It's the human interaction problem, very base level. So technology and psychology, I think, are going to go hand in hand in that.
And one of the things that everybody looked for in technology they wanted to advance is measurement. And I think, Cory, you mentioned that the PR industry has always been criticized for being harder to measure the impact of the work that we do. Do you see that the technologies that Google is working on or that anyone else is involved with are going to be able to reach, find that holy grail of the impact of the work that we do?
I mean, you're always, I think, sort of seeking the holy grail. I mean, how many decades did it take marketing to develop like a MarTech stack?
Yes.
I mean, it's not one technology. It's not like a holy grail. It's actually some bespoke combination of technologies that, again, we've been talking about it all night. This idea of technology plus human augmentation leads you to a conclusion within your organization about what matters to you. So when I think, I'll use a non-Google example. When I was at Starbucks, the one thing that we knew for certain in the United States is that if you were a consumer and you were asked in a survey, are you coming back in the next 30 days? 72% of the people who said yes listed a single characteristic of the company as the reason that they would come back. And that person, that reason was a person in a green apron. And often that person had a name. Like Jim in my X store or Susie in my Y store. And so that took that company years to sort of develop enough discipline about the data that they were collecting, that they were analyzing, to actually determine, hey, there's some correlation or some more linear relationship between inputs and outputs that's actually important for the business. And so communications, our team contributed to that stack or that pile of data. But what I would say is that most companies are probably data rich and analysis poor. And that's really, it's less about have we found the holy grail or do we understand sort of like the precise combination of technologies. It's what business problem you're trying to solve. And I think once you have a better sense of why it is you're measuring something and what output you're seeking, you can do a much better job of determining, we don't need these 5 things, but these are really important. And I think, to your point, PR for decades has been sort of seeking, but probably not as aggressively. I mean, when we have when eventually there's some sort of confab that's invented around comms tech rather than MarTech, then I'll know that we're sort of on the right path. Haven't seen it yet.
Okay. Alex, how about you? Can Zignal someday going to be able to tell us somebody's read a story or read something on social media and they're going to go out and buy something?
I mean, I think it's possible. I think it takes a lot more data than what Zignal would have. I mean, I can't necessarily predict you're going to buy something just on social alone. I could have a pretty good idea, but I think it would take more data, like everything you maybe ever read or browsed on the internet, all your shopping history. Like if I had experience data, oh yeah, but I don't have experience data, so it would be
But do you have it and you're not telling us?
Oh, no.
I'm just wondering.
And one final question, and I'm going to ask Melissa to wrap it up. We haven't talked a lot about data privacy, but CEOs said that was one of the major factors in terms of technology. Edith, what about privacy? Where does that, for the average consumer, more and more of our information is being shared. Companies know more and more about all of our habits. Zignal apparently knows a lot more than we think. Where do you draw the line on it? Or is that just going to continue to be growing?
This is an interesting question to ask privacy to a journalist, I will say.
You're supposed to protect your source, right? If the AI is your source, you're going to tell it?
From a journalistic perspective, of course, this this conflict between companies protecting the data and also regulation and the privacy. From our standpoint, because of I would say probably not a very solid framework yet in terms of regulation. It certainly is a very interesting time for us as journalists. We have a lot of we have many stories that we can write about because all of these are all very human. These are all very human interest. It has a very interesting angle, and that, for us, these are conflicts that we should write about and be able to shed light to others to say, look, your data may or may not be private because of certain reasons. In terms of data privacy, I think data is an asset. Information is an asset, and companies really should look at it as something that they should guard, and how they obtain it is also important, and how they obtain it and to make it transparent to others, to say, hey, we have obtained these data sets, in a legal framework in a very transparent way is really important good business practices, because it helps create the confidence and the trust, of the consumers, and also for the readers who will be reading about the content.
What about from Google's perspective, Cory? How does data privacy fit into?
It'll be one of the most important things we're focused on for the foreseeable future. There probably isn't even a time scale that you could attach to it. And I would just borrow Edith's phrasing because it's so good. I think that what we're focused on, there are a set of first principles that we published and that we talk about, but the two that I think you'll see us sort of lean on over and over and over again will be this transparency idea of what data is being shared and why, and then the idea of choice or power for the user to be able to make decisions, clear ones, about which data I'm comfortable sharing and which data I'm not, and a set of controls that are easily discoverable, and that if you make the decision, I don't want that data out in the world, you can very quickly and easily shut that down.
As an individual?
As an individual.
Okay.
And I think, and as an enterprise. So, the enterprises have an enormous amount of data, and I think that, for chief technology officers and companies, they're making purchase decisions, in many respects based on the fact that their workforce is essentially a nation of users. So that sophistication also transfers to the tools that they use in their business life every day. So, all of us, regardless of sort of whether we call ourselves consumer companies or enterprise companies, I think the burden is on us to prove that, we understand the nature of the issue and why the concerns are being raised, and to embrace that. And I think those are the principles that we'll carry forward, and you'll hear a lot more by the time we roll up to our developer conference in May.
Oh, really? Well, we'll look forward to that. Melissa, how would you summarize this conversation?
I think I would start by saying that all of what we've heard tonight means we must use technology tools, and we must be very, very good at that, and we have to keep up, and it's going to be a challenge. But at the same time, I would say we can't be manipulated by these tools, and we also can't become dependent, because then we've lost it, to your point. We've probably lost our jobs. I think the second thing is we have to be the people who stand for truth. And we have to poke all the time at, is this transparency, to your point? Do our chief executives really tell the truth? And if not, are we poking? Are we pushing? Because it will come out. The genie is never getting back in the bottle. And so we have to know that the truth will rise to the top and behave that way all the time. And so if we're working for a company that doesn't want to do that or is reluctant to do that, our job is to say, you can't not do it. You can't not do it. This is who we are today. And I guess the last thing, Fred, is something that I feel is such a simple human element, and a piece of advice that I would give my daughter and anybody who asks me: do the right thing. Do the right thing. Because if we don't do the right thing, we will be found out very, very quickly, and it won't be pretty. And besides that, why wouldn't we want to do it anyway? Yeah. So I would leave on that note that I think, all of the research that you've done indicates that technology is here to stay, and it's a great thing. But if we don't behave in the equation and do the right thing, then it turns against us, and that we're the ones that are making technology then a bad thing.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, the panel. Really.